I am also on West Coast time, so I am going to be as brief as I can. I know I'm what's between you and the break. I'm not as caffeinated as Corey indicated. I will do what I can to provide a bookend to our keynotes today. So first, I've been around open source for 30 years, from Linux kernel to Kubernetes. I've been in private industry primarily in that career, Silicon Valley Tech, 30 years, from startups to larger companies, IBM, Intel, VMware. And I've been around for 30 years in security as well. I've got a 1994 copy of Bruce Schneier's Applied Cryptography that I'm hoping to get autographed today. But I'm new to CISA just this year, 5 months in now. And I want to give a little bit of a story as to why I joined this organization, because it's about the intersection of innovation and CISA's mission. CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the US government. And what drew me here is kind of something I've observed across my career. 4 engines of innovation. The first, obviously following Corey's talk, front of mind here in the US, capitalism, private industry. But also for millennia, academics have been pushing the state of the art forward. And in more recent decades, open source collaboration has shown itself to be a thriving font of immense innovation value. And last, obviously, I'm here as a representative of the US government. You had to expect it, government also. For millennia, government has been supporting innovation and advancing the welfare of its citizens. Our word government itself comes from the Greek kuberneo, and forgive my pronunciation if that's wrong, but the word means to steer. Government has a role in steering. The gubernaculum is a rudder. Now, each of these 4 areas has its pros and cons, pluses and minuses, things we've been hearing about all morning. None of them exist in a vacuum. They're part of an interconnected continuum, and CISA has a part in that. So CISA's mission is to understand, manage, and reduce cyber and physical infrastructure risk. This spans all sorts of infrastructure. I happen to be in just the cyber portion of it. But how we do it is particularly important. A lot of people think of government, perhaps especially negatively these days, around regulation. CISA, it's important to note, is a partnership organization. Our mission, our vision, our strategy, our tactics, they're aligned with many of the principles woven through the talks today in these prior keynotes. Words like partnership, collaboration, connection. We work to connect the stakeholders, these industry, academic, open source, government stakeholders, with each other, to resources, to analysis, to tools, so that they can build out their own security and resilience. The goal is that together, we're moving forward towards higher security and resilience. I can't talk about moving forward without talking about where we are. Everybody's seen this picture at this point, right? XKCD. Perhaps overly brutal to us open source people who, yes, often are one of the weaker links in a big complex chain. Maybe not intentionally, though. I don't know if you've seen this variant poking at one of those other engines of innovation, also sometimes a weakness in the chain. So the state of the art, we know it's precarious. Nobody wants to see bridges falling down. And I want to paint a prettier picture, even as things might feel precarious. Too often, investment in secure development process is not aligned with the criticality of the project, the impact of its potential failure. None of us want to see bridges falling down, right? We'd rather see things being built and built up and stronger. The security results are analogous, whether it's other infrastructure or security infrastructure, when things are not sufficiently maintained. It's specifically these types of gaps that CISA aims to bridge across to understand, manage, and reduce risks. And it's what drew me to bridge my personal experiences in industry, academia, and open source, to get involved, to contribute, to do more. So what is CISA doing? Last year, we published our first open source roadmap outlining 4 primary goals, but the overarching goal is that we can play a part in fostering secure, sustainable, resilient, healthy, vibrant open source communities and ecosystems. And it's our belief that the federal government should participate as a community member and make the requisite investments in open source software infrastructure, even as we, unlike anybody else, or just like anybody else, we can't control open source. We have to show up and participate, just like any other community member. So the first goal is around establishing CISA's role and presence in securing open source. We have to coordinate our own work, we have to partner with the community, we need to be a part of driving collective action, and we need to become more externally engaged. Now, the flip side of that is internal. We need to work to lead understanding the prevalence of open source software in the federal civilian executive branch where we sit, and more broadly critical infrastructure, and also contribute beyond that, to develop frameworks to assess systemic open source risk, and then begin assessing risks in the government. Of course, as you do that, then the next step is to work to mitigate things. We are evaluating offering shared services out to federal agencies and beyond as well, state, local, tribal, territorial. We're working to develop policies for the use of open source in government, the secure and sustainable use of open source. And the particular thing that drew me to CISA, coming from an open source program office in my prior role, is to pilot that notion, the private industry notion of open source program offices. Pilot that in CISA, pilot it out to other open source using entities in government. Now finally, a lot of that's internal focused. We also need to show up, do our part, be contributing to hardening the ecosystem. You've probably seen our push towards memory-safe programming language usage. I'm sure most of you have seen our pushes in advancing software bills of material. We're also working to increase security education, both for software developers and the broader public. We have cybersecurity advisors who are constantly being called on by various entities. We're putting out guidance and guidelines for lay people as well. And then I know it was mentioned earlier, VEX, this is a sore spot for many people, the coordinated disclosure of open source software vulnerabilities. It is a key place in which we have a role to play. Now, all of this isn't in a vacuum. We have our CISA open source roadmap, but it relates to a national cybersecurity strategy. I've pulled out a couple of selective quotes from this. I'll leave those for you to read. But I want to highlight these in particular because it shows the alignment between what CISA is doing, the national strategy, and the fundamentals of open source collaboration. If you think about an open source, the four opens: use, study, modify, share. I say four opens, the four freedoms. Four freedoms. The four opens, additionally, though: source, design, development, and community. The values of open source collaboration and this development model that we are familiar with is particularly suited to the need of ensuring the internet remains open, free, global, interoperable, reliable, and secure. We have a unique ability to do that, all of you here today in the room. And with that, it wouldn't be appropriate to not have a call to action. We're here in the US, a participatory democracy. We're at an open source conference. You all can have a part in action here. I've got, I think, 5 things that I want to talk about that CISA has out there, places opportunity for you to be a participant. The first is this open source software security initiative, OS3I report that was recently published. You can find it on the web very easily, put out by the Office of the National Cyber Director and CISA. There was a request for information that went out, and it got 107 comments. That's fantastic, but again, with the notion of participatory democracy, we're not a regulatory agency standing up here telling everybody what they must do versus working to figure out collaboratively and through partnership what is the best path. So hopefully each of you in the room or that your organization participated in this, and we'll keep an eye out for future similar calls and participate in those. We want to hear from you. This particular document had 3 key themes, and again, hopefully each of you is participating in those. Again, adoption of memory-safe languages, R&D around improving software supply chain security tooling, vulnerability information, and then funding and otherwise incentivizing security improvements. I think all of these have been talked about today. The next one, our Enduring Security Framework. There's a link there, you can read it. It's an interesting and useful document, I think, around managing open source software and talks about software bills of materials. I want to highlight, though, the word enduring. It's an intentional word here. We're all in this for the long term. So even as CISA is just starting, and I'm here as a new member of CISA to start the concepts of open source program offices in government, it's gonna take time. We need to be in this for the long haul, and hopefully we can endure at it. Now, as you think about Secure by Design, previously mentioned, there's also a parallel initiative we have called Secure by Demand. These are also published on our website. You can find more information out there. Secure by Design and Secure by Demand are about improving communications and expectations across the producer-consumer spectrum. And here, it was mentioned earlier on the slides, a couple of these things. We have community frameworks like SALSA and S2C2F, which similarly are formalizing practices in that pairing to improve operations and expectations across the producer and consumer spectrum. You can probe for parts of these, which your organization isn't yet practicing well. You can advocate for more responsibility in integrating, updating, validating, and also ideally contributing back to open source upon which your business or your entity depends. Ask your suppliers how they're consuming open source. What are they doing on your behalf to ensure that the components in their products are kept up to date and that they're protecting you, their customer. The next one is a tabletop exercise packet. This was developed, and we ran this at a security summit this spring, as a modifiable template. You can download this from the web, customize it, and it allows you to run your organization through a response practice. Understanding, say, a vulnerable library in your supply chain has been discovered. What do you do next? How do you identify all the parts in the supply chain, where that component is? How would you fix it, and how would you do that without burdening the upstream open source communities? You can treat this like a little D&D mini campaign. Hopefully it's fun. Takes about 4 hours. You have a person who's the designated facilitator. They can lead a half dozen or a dozen people through the process. We've gotten really good feedback on this. People are finding it informative and useful to do the practice. And disaster preparation is really about doing that practice ahead of time. The more we can do ahead of time to be ready and prepared instead of reactive, the better off we will be. The next one, I'm really excited about this. I was in Menlo Park last week talking about this at an industry day. So the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate gives money away, and CISA is partnering with them. So we have this SVIP topic call that's open right now around intrinsic identifiers and artifact dependency graph generation. There's a link there. There's a whole bunch of formalized program information, but I want to highlight a few interesting parts about this. We're trying to be open. This is not something that is restricted to US applicants. There are some criteria that must be met, though, for applicants. The details are out there. And then we have specifically prescribed in the call that applicants must implement change in open source projects. Now, we do expect that they also do things for value-added services or offerings in addition to that, but we want to see capabilities improved, broadly and uniformly adopted. There's upwards of $1.7 million per startup available, and this is also, interestingly, non-dilutive funding. The government's not looking for equity in these startups. The topic call is open till mid-December. I'm really hopeful to be kind of surprised by the innovation that people show up and propose, and looking forward to seeing that then over the coming year or so translate into activity in open source and industry. And this is the second SVIP that we've had. If you've seen Protobahn, this is something that got some funding in a prior round as well. So we are hopefully starting to turn the crank here and execute more. And finally, lots of AI talk today. A lot of words on this slide. The key, I would say, is that we learn from prior lessons. Yes, this is new software. It has some unique features, but we can threat model it like any other software. CISA is getting a lot of requests for advice, and we have recently announced our first chief AI open source officer. So we're trying to bring information again to the ecosystem in terms of best practices. But initially, I would say treat this like any other software, threat model it. And then on that notion of secure by demand, talk to your providers. Previously mentioned that the definition of open source AI is a little fuzzy right now. Think about how, in whatever definition your vendor's given you, what do you have access to? Compared to normal software as you're debugging it, normal open source software where you need basically just the algorithm and kind of the use case scenario, what else would you need here? Are you capable of debugging a simple bug or something that might involve trying to understand, is there a malicious backdoor? And if so, how would you close it? Do you need to have access to weights and training data, parameters, or is the algorithm alone sufficient? Ask your provider if they have tested for things like this. Are they threat modeling? Have they published the results? Are they showing these things? If they're training on public data sets, how are they managing the risk of external data poisoning? These are all things that you can begin doing today to at least mitigate some of the potential risk. And with that, I thank you for your time. I hope this gives you a very brief and quick introduction to some of the things that CISA is doing and where we hope to go in the future. And I hope you all have a great conference.